4131. Please understand this is the month of December. At the end of this month, usually the third week, around the third week of January. And it's something to start on the other side anyway. The 31. The 31 obviously in the throat. The gate of influence. The 31, again, is one of these gates that is, you only begin to realize its complexity when you go into certain areas of design study. If you look at what is the first 88 stages, first 88 degrees of after conception, the 10 stages in the first trimester of the pregnancy, you will see that all life, that is the life of the fetus, begins with the 31st gate. So the 31st gate is very special. It is the key to turning on the thyroid system. And it is really much more powerful than what it would appear in its body graph configuration if you don't understand how much it's involved in the development of the whole vehicle right from the beginning. It is influence, after all. And influence, as the hexagram states, influence cannot exist in a vacuum. And it cannot. It's collective. And everything about the power of the 31 lies in being recognized. So the 31, when it looks out at the world, is always looking to see who is recognized and who isn't, and how you get recognized. Because that is very significant. Without the recognition, there is no way of displaying the capacity. So, for example, if you're a 31-7 alpha, the channel of the alpha, design leadership, good or bad, blah, blah, blah. If you get elected or selected, that's correct. In other words, you're in the office and they need somebody to run the committee and blah, 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 and they choose you. If you got a 31-7, that's terrific, because that's the way it's supposed to work. You need to be elected, selected, it's projected, you need to be given the energy, you need to be given the recognition. But if you just take it, I'll take the job, I'll do it, everybody's going to hate you. Nobody is going to want to follow your leadership, nobody is going to be interested in the least in that kind of leadership. So the dilemma for the gate of influence is that it is very powerful in the sense that it can influence, but it can only influence when it is invited to do so. It's the only way to lead. I'm so glad as a 7 that I don't have the 31. I go out a back door. I'm not waiting to be elected. If I had to wait to be elected, nobody would ever know human design. It wouldn't work. But anyway, so when you're dealing with the 31st gate, you're dealing with a capacity to be able to see the potential. To be able to see the potential to influence, but you also see something else. You see that, the collective process, has to be egalitarian in the way in which it chooses its leaders. There is no other way. And that power is something that can only be shared. You cannot be a collective leader and be a dictator. It's very difficult. Even as a first line theme, let's say out of the 7, you would still be the dictatorship of the proletariat, where you would share the top of the pyramid with a whole bunch of other people. Right? But it's still this sharing of power becomes the way in which they influence others. And of course, that's why we end up in democracies with so much corruption. Because corruption is about resources. And you can see that leadership doesn't have any natural power. Isn't it cute? Leadership is a 31-7. It has no natural power. It needs the juice. They're always collecting money. They're collecting money to run the country, and then they collect money to run their parties, and they collect money to run their campaigns, and they need more money because they have to buy more advertising, and it goes on and on and on and on. They're always looking for resources in order to be able to display their leadership. So the 31 looks out in the world and sees the dilemmas of leadership and the lack of resources. These are the kind of people that run around saying all the time that, the politicians should have more power, not less, more control, not less. The 41 is, it's the start. It really is the starting gate. It carries within it the real mystery of this phase of our incarnative process. What it means to be human now. What drives us. All that comes out of the 41. The reason that it's the beginning of the Ray of New Year is that the 41st gate as a codon is the only initiating codon. So that's like being the capitalization of the first letter of any sentence. It is the beginning of all of these processes. So when the sun goes into the 41st gate, what you get is the beginning of a sequence every year. And it is actually the cross of the unexpected. The 41 and 31 are part of this. And it's something to see about the 41st gate. You never, ever know what's going to come out of there. That's the thing that is so beautiful about the 41st gate. You see, every single experience you can imagine, and all the experiences that you can't imagine, they all begin in the 41st gate. What an incredible resource that is. And what's so interesting from the image of the traditional I Ching is that it's the image of the gardener cutting back the plant. At the end of the season, you cut back the plant so it'll grow stronger. But it's an interesting thing when you're cutting that back, the root system, slowly but surely the root system becomes much more powerful than the above system. And in that root system is all this enormous information stored, and waiting. And what's so interesting about the way it comes out is that the way it comes out is always somehow engineered. There's always a gardener in it. If you read the original, it's interesting to understand that this is a honing. When you look at this channel, the 4130, this is the channel of the recognition of feelings. It's all about recognition. And that recognition is that the recognition is taking place in the clinging fire. 30th gate, the fates. You can trust that like you can. But anyway, what comes out of the 41 comes this very, very, very narrow energy. It is a focused, recognized feeling or desire. And it is this desire that through the 30th gate gets manipulated into any of the possibilities the fates will bring. And out of that, like a fractal, you get all